Okay, so now we're going over the art resource section, not the background, the stuff that's you really have to know. So first, let's move to the ancient Mediterranean world. The first cities in Mesopotamia, this is the Fertile Crescent, and they're always remember Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And in there, of course, very fertile, so they could grow lots of food, which enabled people to not have to move around so civilization could form. And the Sumerians were that first civilization to flourish, and that is 4023-22 BCE. And Egyptian culture, of course, by the Nile begins 3500 BCE. So Sumerians first to flourish. And here's a little picture of that Fertile Crescent. You see here, of course, the two rivers. So in this valley, you have lots of access to water, and that's going to enable you to, of course, have lots of crops. The Cycladic Islands, back to those again, Crete and Greek mainland, their culture by 32 BCE. So it was Sumerians and Egyptians, then Greek, Cretan, Cycladic. Etruscans, that's Italian, from 700 BCE. And again, stability. There's stability now. And if you're wondering where the Cycladic Islands, well, here they are. Here's mainland Greece. And there are all those lovely little islands. All right. Technology. Metalworking. The Bronze Age is from 3000 to 1100 BCE and 1200 to 500 BCE. At this time, they're making tools, and there is advances in construction and building and transportation, all due to the ability to manipulate bronze. Ag production increases with new harvesting tools, so everything doesn't have to be done by hand, and irrigation systems, so now there are stable food sources. And of course, new weapons, and that's going to affect societal relations. Those who have more weapons, more powerful, okay, we're going to be nice to these people. So tools change quite a bit. And here are some examples of metalworking and types of tools. Trade. Trade advances development as the cultures mix, and they're mixing ideas. So when you go to another place, you see what they have, you take some of those ideas back, and so now there is this blending. And the Mediterranean Sea is like a super highway, mainly for Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. All right, culture. So cultural products are left behind. They shape our understanding of these ancient peoples. We don't really have, so much as far as writing goes. So we look at what they left behind, their art, their tools, and that's how we understand them. So when we talk about the first sarcophagus of King Tut, remember he is in the 18th dynasty. Don't forget Egypt depended on the Nile being flooded. And it was the foundation of religious system, and that was between the king or the pharaoh, and he was a mediator between the people and the gods, and people believed he would become a god upon his death. So in some ways he already was godlike. They looked to him as a demigod in a way. So ancient Egyptian art, 3150 to 1000 BCE, again focuses on religion. We find it, of course, in tombs, in temples, in statuary. They're out of stone. That's why those exist. They're everyday items. They made out of perishables. Those items don't exist. So the knowledge we have of this culture comes from the tombs. The Egyptians did not distinguish between a body and a soul. It's all the same thing. And they thought that every person had a parallel self, a ka, and that would inhabit the body after death. The dead were buried with things that they would need, and because again they believed that they would come back to life. And there's the mummification process, and they created a Ka statue just in case preservation of the body failed. So if they couldn't use the body, then they would just use the Ka statue. And here are the periods. There was the early dynastic period, 3150. Then the Old Kingdom, then Middle Kingdom, then New Kingdom. Okay? Early, Old, Middle, New. Now, Akhenaten, who was once known as Amenophis, He converted from the native Egyptian religion to the worship of Aten. And then he moves the capital to Tel El Amarna, and his temples were erected to honor Aten. And so the art is different because there's a focus here on life, not on death. And the bodies here are depicted as relaxed and realistic. And again, they're emphasizing the world over the afterlife. And here is some art from Akhenaten. And the horses you see, they're kind of moving up. They're not stayed, they're dynamic, which means they're moving. Later pharaohs go back to the traditional practices, and you'll see the visual forms go back to sitting, the arms at the side, and they're idealized. They don't want to portray the person as he or she really is, but as he or she should be. Innovations in mummy making. Only nobility, court officials, very few commoners were mummified, and they even mummified some animals. I think I once saw, it was a cat mummy in a museum. And since the pharaoh would use the body later, it was important to preserve it forever. And we know of their processes through the paintings that they had in the tombs. Once the mummy's wrappings were opened, that's what they used to do to check out the mummy inside. And there used to even be, people would purchase these things and they would have unwrapping parties to see all the things that were wrapped inside. But now scientists don't have to unwrap them. They can use a CAT scan. So now they're not ruining the body, they're not ruining the shroud, and all the things that were meant to be with that person are still there. And they developed the mummification process in the 4th dynasty, and it takes 70 days to complete the process. So here's the procedure. First, you clean the body. Then you make an incision on the left side, and they're going to remove the lungs, liver, stomach, intestines. They want to move out the things that are going to, rot. But they didn't get rid of them. The organs were washed and packed in natron, which is salt. Now, the brain was extracted with a long hook that went through the nose. So they put this hook up there, and then they'd smash the brain, and then they'd twist it, and then they would pull it out. They didn't believe the brain was important because the IQ was in the heart. And the heart they left in the body. The body was filled with natron, again salt. I've also heard it was filled with sometimes sawdust, sometimes resin. And it was left to dry for 40 days. The body would be rinsed and rubbed with oils. And the organs were either wrapped in linen and placed back in the body, or they were placed in canopic jars. The body, again, is filled with linen or sawdust, or leaves, and it is sutured. It's rubbed with oil again and wrapped in linen, and various amulets were placed in the linen to protect the body on its journey. So again, if you unwrap the mummy, then all of these little amulets would fall out. The elaborate burial would include a covered mask, and it would be placed in a single sarcophagus or in a series of sarcophagi, I guess you would say, or sarcophaguses. The treasure of Tut's tomb. Discovered in 1922, and at that time then it set off an Egypt craze. Fashion, jewelry, music, film, architecture. They start having all these mummy movies. Now, Tut was a minor king, but he's important for our understanding of Egyptian art because his tomb was pretty much left untouched. All of the other tombs had been pillaged. There were many riches left in Tut's tomb, and we don't know if this is unusual. Did they always leave lots of riches for just any pharaoh? And since King Tut really didn't accomplish anything because he died, I believe, at the age of 19, was there a reason for him having so much, or is that just what they did for all pharaohs? That we don't know. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and pharaohs were buried there between the 16th and 11th centuries BCE. And here's a picture of the Valley of the Kings. Nice dirt. Upper Egypt, or Valley of Kings, on the western bank of the Nile. It is opposite now modern-day Luxor. The pharaohs were buried in rock-cut tombs, so they would be less visible hoping that people would not go and disturb them and pillage them. It didn't always work. Howard Carter, he's a Brit, and he is the one who discovered the tomb in 1922. He had been in Egypt over 30. I don't remember what that meant. Oh, there were over 30 tombs there, but they were difficult to access. And sometimes the things that would be left there were rubble from later tombs. So they didn't know if there was anything left, and should we look here because they're just a bunch of rubble? Was somebody already here? In 1902 to 1914, operations to look for tombs was sponsored by Theodore Davis. He was an American. Now, what would happen is Egypt would grant one particular group concessions to go and look for tombs. And at this particular time, it was Theodore Davis. His crew did find a small pit, and it had pottery jars with Tut's seal on it. And they even found some other burial items, a faience cup with Tut's name on it. But Davis gives up. Carter then convinces the Earl of Carnarvon to take up the franchise. But then World War I comes along, so Carter is delayed until 1918 in order to go and dig. And he went and he was digging for 4 years. Carnarvon, who's footing the bill for this whole thing, says, okay, 4 years, that's enough, we're going to give up. But Carter begs for one more season. He says, I'll even pay for time after that. And in this last season, on 11/4/22, November 4th, 1922, Carter finds a staircase to a doorway. Dun, dun, dun. Now, the door has seals of a royal necropolis, and it looks unplundered. So Carter gets on the phone or telegraph or whatever, and he invites Carnarvon for the unsealing. So Carter waits till Carnarvon gets there. Carnarvon shows up with his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, and they open the tomb on November 26th. When they first open it, there's a 25-foot passageway, and again, it's filled with rubble. So they're thinking, all right, then chances are this thing isn't undisturbed. It's probably been pillaged. But there was another door. So they drill a hole, and Carter inserts a candle, and he says, everywhere is a glint of gold. So they know they've literally hit the jackpot. There were 4 chambers, an antechamber, an annex, burial chamber, and treasury, and the place is packed. There were ceremonial beds, thrones, vases, chariots, inlaid boxes, statuettes, weapons, jewelry, and other goods. The shrine itself measures 17 feet wide and 11 feet deep, and it's 9 feet high. And this was kind of rushed and put together because Tut died unexpectedly and so young. There was also a shrine of wood which was covered with gold. Inside, there is a large stone sarcophagus, and it held a series of 3 smaller coffins wrapped in linen, and the innermost, of course, was the most elaborate. The first sarcophagus is the one that you have to know. It is, should be 6 feet 1 inch, 1/1, made with beaten gold, 1/8 of an inch thick, and it weighs 1/4 ton, so 500 pounds. It's chased, engraved, and inlaid with semi-precious stones, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian. He is presented as the god Osiris, and he's the god of the afterlife, and that makes sense because they believe in the afterlife. There is a myth that Osiris was killed by his brother Set because Set wanted the throne. So he cut Osiris's body into pieces and scattered them. Osiris's wife Isis found all the body parts, and she and Anubis, who was god of funerals, brought him back to life. So this is why they are showing Tut as Osiris, because it's that ability to be brought back to life. So if we take a look, okay, lapis lazuli, you see it's kind of a darker blue, the turquoise and carnelian, and so the darker blue is going to be the lapis lazuli. The lighter blue down here is going to be the turquoise, and whenever you see red, that's carnelian, semi-precious stones. Okay, Tut has a ceremonial beard, and folded linen headdress. Take a look back here. See the beard. And the headdress. And these are Old Kingdom images. The hands are crossed above his chest, and he's holding a crook and a flail. These are Osiris's symbols. The crook, which is this, and the flail. And of course, a crook is a cane with a hooked handle. The flail is a rod with the 3 attached strands. So these tools were used by shepherds, and they symbolize 2 means of control. One is to guide, one's to beat. So one way or the other, they'll get you to fall into place. Tut wears a double strand of gold and blue faience beads on neck and chest. Okay. Here, double strand, there, okay. And he's covered with a wide collar of beads in red and blue like bracelets. Cloisonne work is in the same color over the abs and arms. This is on the lower part, which you can't see. And the lower half is also just as richly decorated. Cloisonne just means enamel work. And here we have pictures of, this is Anubis, kind of like the jackal god. And here is Osiris. And here is Isis. And you see quite often their fronts to you, well, they're facing sideways. It's an odd thing, and I don't know. It's just a weird pose. Okay, and here's an example of Cloisonne work. This is just enamel work. All this was done. All right, so the vulture, nekbet, which is a bird, and the cobra, wadjet, wrap wings around the torso. Nekbet and Wadjet are goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt. They hold a hieroglyphic for infinity, and they are also on Tut's forehead. The waist down is a golden surface, and it's engraved with figures of the goddesses Isis and Nephthys, and their wings embrace him. So on his forehead, you'll have a bird and a cobra. Nekbek and Wadjet. And here we go. There's Nekbet and Wadjet. Same thing, doing that kind of side, whatever, even with animals. How weird. Okay, so within the coffin, Tut is wrapped in linen, and there's a death mask covering his head and shoulders. The outer 2 coffins are richly decorated, but they're carved of wood, and they are covered with plaster and a very thin layer of gold. The outer coffins are in blues and red faience and colored glass. All 3 coffins were in the large stone sarcophagus, and all this was first seen by Carter. Tut was a minor figure. Again, he didn't rule that long. He started at age 9, I believe he died at 19. And again, 18th dynasty. His dad may have been Akhenaten. Tut is dead in 1323, and at first it was thought he was murdered because he died so young. But then it's believed that he had broken his leg and had died of infection. A DNA test in 2010 reveals that he has malaria, and probably an infection, and that he was very weakened, so he had a natural death. And we only know all of this because his tomb is preserved, which is why he is important to us. Lord Carnarvon died 6 weeks after the tomb was opened. He nicked a mosquito bite while he was shaving, which led to blood poisoning, and it started this belief in the curse. However, Carter lived a long time after the opening, and he died from lymphoma in 1939. Okay, and we will end right here, I think. Let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, start it. And where...